Have you ever wondered how many times a man remains silent about his pain so as not to seem weak? How many times he loves with such intensity that he forgets himself? Because after so many years of searching for love, he ends up choosing solitude. Kafka once said, "The chains of slavery are made of silence, and that is exactly what we are living. Men enslaved by roles they did not choose, by expectations that devour them, by relationships that have become fields of emotional trials. And when that silence finally breaks, it does not explode, it disappears." The question no one dares to ask is this: what happens to a man when he realizes that, even by giving everything, it will never be enough? For decades, he has learned that he must mold himself, be strong but sensitive, be a provider without expecting gratitude, be stable, but not too much, so as not to seem boring. He has been trained to serve. And when he realized that his service was no longer seen as a gift, but as an obligation, he grew weary. The modern man is not only turning away from women, he is turning away from an idea. The idea that his life must be in service to others, to have value. This rupture is not simple. It is painful. It's like tearing off his own skin to be reborn with another. This text is not a manifesto against love. It is a brutal call to truth, an honest attempt to understand why so many men are letting go of the emotional steering wheel and saying, "I'm done playing." If you are a woman, this text might make you uncomfortable. If you are a man, it might bring you relief. But for both, my promise is this: by the end of this journey, you will no longer see love nor withdrawal in the same way. It is not new that a man bends silently under invisible demands. From childhood, he learns that his worth lies not in who he is, but in what he can endure. He endures in silence. He endures with strength. He endures for everyone. And the cruelest part of it all is that no one sees it. A man's fatigue is neither admired nor embraced. It is simply taken for granted, as if being always available, steadfast, and whole were a natural contract, a condition of his existence. Society sees a man as a rock, stable, useful, unshakable. But every rock, no matter how solid it appears, crumbles over time. It is within that this invisible fatigue is born. An exhaustion that does not scream, that accumulates between the lines, in the "it doesn't matter" he hears when he tries to be romantic, in the veiled contempt for his daily efforts, in the expectation that he solve everything without ever complaining. And then, one ordinary day, the man wakes up and realizes he is exhausted, not from love, but from the feeling of always giving more than he receives, exhausted from being seen as a resource rather than a soul. Carl Jung wrote, "What you resist persists, but what you confront dissolves." And when a man finally confronts the abyss of his fatigue, something dissolves. But it's not him. It's the illusion, the idea that if he is good enough, he will be truly loved. For here is the wound. Many men spend their lives trying to earn love. They try to fix what they didn't break. They try to keep the peace, even when they are the only ones trying. They try until the effort kills them inside. It's like rowing against a tide that never yields. The more he tries to get closer, the further he drifts from himself, until he becomes a ghost in his own story. Little by little, he stops insisting, stops sending long messages to explain himself. He no longer buys flowers for someone who treats affection like a currency of exchange. He begins to ration his presence, and that's when the world takes notice. He's changed. He's cold. He's not the same. But the truth is, he has simply stopped bleeding for someone who didn't even bring a bandage. This change, though painful, is also liberating. Because when a man stops trying to be the hero for someone who doesn't want to be saved, he begins to save himself. And that is the most dangerous moment for the system, when a man discovers that he doesn't need anyone's approval to feel complete. It's as if he suddenly realizes he has spent years renting rooms in houses that never truly welcomed him, and now he finally decides to build his own home within himself. This new man does not shout, does not fight, does not beg. He withdraws with the serenity of someone who knows that love demanding his self-annihilation is not love. It's emotional debt. And no matter how much they try to convince him that he is selfish, cowardly, or incapable of handling a strong woman, he has understood. True strength lies in choosing his own peace in a world that blames him for desiring it. Nietzsche said, "Inner peace is the greatest of victories." And there is a victory that does not show itself, one that is felt in the silence of the night when he lies down and realizes he no longer has to measure every word, every gesture, every breath. He has not stopped loving. He has simply stopped begging for love. This fatigue, as invisible as it is devastating, is the starting point of a new era. An era where a man will no longer be defined solely by what he has endured, but by what he has chosen not to endure anymore. And that choice is revolutionary, because the true masculine awakening will not come from a cry, but from an absence. The absence of unanswered messages, the absence of presence where there were only demands, the absence of effort in relationships that offered only reproaches. This invisible fatigue, which for so long was a source of guilt, now becomes a compass. And for the first time in a long time, the man walks, not to please, but to find himself. Before continuing, have you noticed that the more you break, the less you are respected? The problem is not in feeling, but in letting those feelings control your actions. Most people live as if it were normal to explode, give up, or justify themselves, but none of that generates respect. What does generate respect is control, presence, and the coldness of someone who knows exactly who they are. There is a concrete way to develop this, and we explain it in a straightforward video. No nonsense, only what truly works. If you want to see it, scan the code on the screen or click the link in the description or the first pinned comment. There is a moment, as subtle as it is devastating, when admiration turns into fatigue. An imperceptible instant when the man who once dreamed of love begins to flee from any sign of it, not because of an immediate trauma, but because of a slow emotional intoxication, an exhaustion of hope. For a long time, men have been conditioned to idealize women, the image of the muse, the goddess, the redeemer. She would be his salvation, his purpose, his north. And by believing this, he projected onto her the entire meaning of his life. Everything he did, work, success, sacrifice, was to be worthy of being chosen, as if love were a prize to be won. But it wasn't. Modern romance has traded depth for performance, connection for competition, mystery for manipulation. And so, the man who once idealized now looks at it all with dry eyes, because he has understood that what was offered to him was not love, but a game, a test, a vanity, disguised as affection. That's where a new kind of pain is born, the pain of disillusionment. Simone Weil wrote, "Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity." And that is exactly what is missing. Today, relationships are not built on full attention, but on momentary convenience. There is no longer space to see the other, only an urgency to be seen. The man realizes he is no longer a partner, but a mirror. He must reflect what she wants to feel. If he fails, he ceases to be useful and is discarded. This subtle movement erodes something essential within him, the capacity to give himself, because deep down, no one can bear giving themselves entirely to an insatiable void. And so, without drama, he changes. He stops idealizing and begins to observe with coldness what once enchanted him, the game of seduction, the quest for connection. It now feels artificial, exhausting, predictable. It's like watching a play whose script he knows by heart, including the ending. He has seen friends betrayed after years of fidelity. He has heard stories of men who gave everything and were accused of giving nothing. He himself, perhaps, was a hero one day and a burden the next. Romanticism hasn't died. It's been murdered, and its body is being mourned on social media, where smiles are poses and dinners are trophies of a happiness that exists only in captions. Of course, there are exceptions, always, but they become so rare that the risk no longer justifies the investment. The man then becomes indifferent, not out of innate coldness, but out of survival. Indifference is not the opposite of love. It is the end of the game. It's when you no longer want to win or lose, when the game board loses all meaning. In this new state, the man stops searching. He withdraws, not out of anger, but out of emotional hygiene. He begins to prioritize what modern romance promised but never delivered: peace, respect, stability. And he discovers that these things don't need to come from another. They can and must be born within him. Albert Camus wrote, "In the middle of winter, I finally learned that there was in me an invincible summer." Perhaps that is what a man finds when he steps away from idealization: a silent summer, a fierce clarity, the certainty that it's no longer worth feeding a myth that only keeps his soul starving. And, curiously, when he stops idealizing, he doesn't begin to hate, he simply begins to see. He sees how much he was manipulated, how much he confused intensity with love, challenge with depth, chaos with passion. And realizing this, he smiles, a sad but free smile, because there is no going back. After seeing the theater behind the curtain, it's impossible to be enchanted by the stage again. This indifference is not dehumanization, it's mourning, the mourning of the hope he held in his chest. And once that mourning is lived, the man is never the same again. He becomes someone else, quieter, more attentive, more selective. He can still love, but never again at the expense of himself. And that changes everything. It's not immediate, it's like a slow-acting poison. At first, everything feels captivating, passionate, alive. She challenges him, provokes him, tests his limits. And he, conditioned to confuse intensity with depth, thinks he has found a different woman. But over time, that intensity turns into demands. What seemed like passion reveals itself as a silent struggle for control, a kind of emotional tug-of-war where the rope is his peace. This man, who once desired a quiet love, finds himself in relationships that function like emotional quicksand. There, every gesture is evaluated, every word decoded, every absence a punishment. He finds himself in a constant state of alert, as if living in an emotional labyrinth where any misstep can become an argument for another veiled attack. And he adapts. He begins to measure every sentence, anticipate her displeasure, live not to be but to avoid conflict. At that moment, something has already been lost: himself. Foucault said, "Where there is power, there is resistance." But the man doesn't resist, at least not at first. He yields because he still believes that yielding is loving, because he hasn't yet learned that true love never comes in the form of a test. And when he realizes this, he no longer knows who he is outside the relationship. This type of bond, deeply toxic yet socially accepted, feeds on a man who doubts himself, a man taught to endure, to fix, to persist, and who thus accepts being subjected to a logic of emotional scarcity. He receives affection when he succeeds, coldness when he fails, but the failure is never clear. He must guess, always guess, as if the relationship were an emotional minefield. The relationship becomes a dynamic of intermittent reinforcement. One moment affection, the next rejection. One moment tenderness, the next calculated distance. This cycle is vicious and addictive because, neurologically, the human brain responds more intensely to inconsistency than to stability. That's why so many unbalanced relationships feel thrilling, but they are not love. They are dopamine. It's the excitement of trying to earn something that should be given freely. This man then lives for her approval. He doesn't allow himself to fail, to rest, to be. And the cruelest part is that this power game doesn't present itself as a game. It's disguised as female empowerment, emotional maturity, modern relationships, but at its core, it's a trap. Because where there is constant psychological tension, there is no love, there is control. Over time, the man's body begins to react. He develops symptoms he doesn't understand. Insomnia, constant anxiety, the feeling of always being in debt, a debt that is never settled. It's at this point that he begins to ask himself, why do I have to fight so hard for someone to stay by my side? Why does her affection feel like a currency I only receive when I obey? When did love become a negotiation? The truth is, he forgot himself to avoid being forgotten by her. But something within him begins to awaken. A small but firm voice says, "You are paying for your presence with your essence." And when that truth takes hold, it doesn't leave. It begins to corrode the game, peel away the varnish, reveal that love demanding constant emotional effort, constant vigilance, constant validation, is not love, it's romantic oppression. Erich Fromm said that mature love is a union with the preservation of integrity. But what this man experiences is the opposite. A union under threat of abandonment, of silence, of rejection. He begins to realize he is trapped, not by chains but by guilt, by the fear of being called weak if he leaves, by the fear of being seen as the villain if he can't take it anymore, by the fear of being accused of not knowing how to handle a strong woman. But at that moment, a new consciousness emerges, a courage born not of anger, but of lucidity. He realizes he can no longer continue, that his mental health, his body, his spirit are crying out for air. And for the first time, he considers the unthinkable, leaving. But he doesn't leave slamming doors. He leaves in silence. He leaves through changes in habits, fewer explanations, the decision to sleep in peace rather than try to fix the insatiable. This man begins to distance himself, and the further he goes, the more he breathes, the more he realizes how much he had lost trying to maintain the us. And then he understands, peace is not a reward, it is a right. And no one, absolutely no one, has the right to own your emotional state. He begins to rebuild himself, little by little, with dignity, with silence, with small but definitive decisions. And the most beautiful thing is that he doesn't go back, not out of resentment, but because he no longer fits. He no longer fits the role of emotional provider, no longer fits the games of prove you love me. He no longer fits in the theater where his worth is measured by his ability to erase himself. This man has learned. He has learned that love is only true when it doesn't demand his self-extinction. He has learned that reciprocity is not requested, it is felt. And above all, he has learned that the greatest act of love he can offer is to himself. Commitment, a big word, dense, laden with invisible promises. For a long time, it was seen as the pinnacle of love, the place where two beings meet to finally rest in each other's hearts. But today, in silence, many men are discovering that this commitment is actually a contract of emotional dependency, disguised as stability. He enters a relationship with a genuine desire to build. He wants to be there. He wants it to work. But little by little, he realizes that the relationship demands far more than presence, effort, or loyalty. It demands his emotional submission. He notices that he must constantly validate the other person while not being allowed to show his own needs without being labeled weak, insecure, or difficult. Everything must be measured. Affection, silence, intensity. He begins to walk on eggshells, and they call it love. But what he doesn't perceive, at least at first, is that he is being absorbed by a profoundly unbalanced dynamic. one where his presence is always expected but rarely valued, where his effort is seen as an obligation, not a choice. And that's when commitment reveals itself to be a prison. The man begins to adapt. He changes his tone of voice to avoid seeming aggressive, filters what he feels to avoid disturbing. He makes daily, silent concessions to keep the peace, and all this sacrifice is seen as normal. Little by little, he ceases to be an individual. He becomes a reflection of what the other wants him to be. And as a reflection, he begins to disappear. There is a brutal difference between loving someone and trying to be accepted by someone. But many men can no longer distinguish between the two. The relationship becomes an arena of validation. If he fails to meet expectations, he is punished with silence, distance, subtle reprisals. There is no dialogue, there is control. And even if that control is wrapped in affection, it remains control. Little by little, the man realizes that the relationship is based on a perverse logic. Prove you love me constantly, but never ask me to prove it to you. Erich Fromm, in The Art of Loving, says that mature love is one where two beings preserve their individuality while choosing to grow together. But what we see today is the opposite, a model where the man must sacrifice his essence to sustain the other's affection. He begins to develop anxiety, not clinical but existential, the anxiety of living in a constant state of alert. What will the next test be? What will the next veiled criticism be? How long will the peace last this time? He lives as if holding a cracked cup with extreme care, knowing that any sincere move could break everything. And so he begins to silence himself, not because he feels nothing, but because he has understood that expressing himself can be used against him. Love, for him, has become a game of emotional survival, and to survive, he disconnects. It's at this point that many men begin to ask themselves, "What am I doing here?" But the answer is slow to come, because he was taught to persist, to persevere, to carry the emotional weight of the entire relationship on his shoulders. And that's why he stays. He stays longer than he should. He stays even when his emotional health is crumbling. He stays because he's afraid of seeming weak. He stays because deep down, he still believes he will be loved if he does just a little more, just a little more. But that little becomes an abyss, and what was meant to be commitment turns into emotional captivity. He begins to live to meet expectations and forgets what it was like to live for himself. His life is reduced to reacting to the other's desires, like a server operating in the background, discreet, functional, switched off. And the most perverse part of all this is that the world applauds this kind of man. They say he's a good partner, that he gives everything for her, that he's an example. No one realizes he's dying in silence. And then there's a spark. An ordinary day, one silence too many, a contemptuous glance, an ironic comment. He feels it, not in his mind but in his body. He feels that something inside him has gone too far, that he can no longer keep losing himself trying to be enough. And at that moment, he begins to return to himself, slowly, hesitantly, with guilt. But he returns. He begins to say, no. He begins to remember who he was before trying to fit in. He begins to understand that true commitment starts with himself. And then comes the rupture, not always with the relationship, but with the illusion that he must constantly sacrifice himself to be loved. He realizes that true love doesn't demand self-betrayal, and that no one, absolutely no one, is worth the price of his own peace. Nietzsche wrote, "Become who you are," and perhaps that is the man's new commitment. To be who he is, without apologizing for it. It wasn't sudden. The decision didn't come with anger, explosions, or even sadness. It came with a silence, one of those silences that cannot be contained in words or justifications. It came like a tide retreating from the shore without a fuss, but taking everything with it. The man who chooses himself is not rebelling, not declaring war. He is coming home, returning to a place he abandoned long ago. Himself. For years, perhaps decades, he lived for others. For the woman who demanded constant love without offering presence. For the parents who projected their frustrations onto him. For a society that taught him to be useful before being authentic. And he tried. He tried to be everything: romantic, provider, steadfast, sensitive, successful, available. He tried to meet expectations he didn't even fully understand. But the more he tried, the further he drifted from himself. It's exhausting to live in a body that functions as a service. It's lonely to love like an emotional employee. It's madness to try to be seen by eyes that only perceive what you can offer and not who you are. And so, he grows tired. But it's a different kind of fatigue, not of the body, but of the soul. This fatigue pushes him towards silence. And silence, contrary to what they say, is not absence, it is presence. The presence of self, the presence of boundaries, the presence of lucidity. He begins to realize that the validation he sought outside only made sense because there was a void within him. A void he tried to fill with relationships, achievements, praise, and promises. But now he decides to face it. Not to cover it up, but to fill it with what no one can take away. Consciousness, roots, inner freedom. Viktor Frankl wrote, "When we can no longer change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." And that's what this man does. He changes, but not to please. He changes to survive with dignity. And when he chooses himself, the world notices, but too late. Those who took him for granted now feel his absence as a void hard to name. Those who mocked his sensitivity now accuse him of coldness. Those who ignored his boundaries now call him selfish. But he doesn't react, doesn't respond, doesn't justify himself. Because when a man reconciles with his own truth, what others think of him becomes distant noise. He no longer needs to win arguments. He has won something far more difficult: self-abandonment. This new man speaks less, but with more weight. He looks into eyes without averting his gaze, but without begging. He no longer sends long texts trying to explain the inexplicable. He simply is, and that is enough. This silent masculinity is not apathetic. It is solid. It is not absent. It is selective. It is not cold. It is protective, but only for those who deserve protection. He stops romanticizing chaos, stops confusing intensity with love, stops believing that true love requires constant suffering. He begins to seek what once seemed impossible: peace without guilt. This peace doesn't come with medals or applause. It comes with a relief known only to those who have been imprisoned within themselves. It's waking up without the weight of having to prove something to someone. It's being in a place and knowing you're there because you want to be, not because you were manipulated to stay. It's looking back and understanding that everything that hurt also set you free. Simone de Beauvoir wrote, "Freedom is a conquest, not a gift." And the man who chooses himself understands this viscerally. His freedom wasn't given to him. He bled for it. He had to lose to remember who he was. He had to be rejected to accept himself. He had to walk alone to never again accept a companionship that demands his mutilation. And when he returns, because he always returns, he is different, quieter, more centered, more whole. This man is not unreachable, but he is no longer willing to be reached by just any outstretched hand. He no longer seeks attention. He seeks truth. And where there is no truth, he doesn't stay. He will love again, yes, but with open eyes, an awake heart, and feet firmly on the ground. He will love with maturity, with discernment, and with deep respect for himself. And the most beautiful thing is that he now knows. He doesn't need to be chosen to feel valuable, because he has already chosen himself. and that no one can take away. So, there it is. What began with uncomfortable questions ends with a serene certainty. Many men are not distancing themselves from women out of anger, ego, or rebellion. They are distancing themselves out of lucidity. They don't want to win a war. They want to leave it. They don't want to be admired. They want to be respected. They are not choosing solitude out of contempt for love, but out of fidelity to their own peace. This movement has no leaders, no flags, no hashtags. It happens in the silence of rooms, in empty gazes, in messages never sent. It happens when a man, after years of trying to earn affection, realizes the price is too high and decides to stop paying with his soul. But this distancing is not the end of love. On the contrary, it may be the only path possible for love to regain its true meaning. Because only those who have already lost themselves trying to please another can understand the value of a love that doesn't demand constant self-sacrifice. A revolution is underway, and it is invisible. It doesn't happen in the streets or in speeches. It happens when a man says for the first time, "No, I matter too." And that no carries the weight of centuries. It's a no to emotional manipulation. It's a no to conditional love. It's a no to a masculinity that demands strength but forbids fragility. It's a no to the role of emotional savior in relationships that only work as long as he is bleeding in silence. But above all, it's a yes. Yes to freedom. Yes to his own voice. Yes to the right to exist outside the logic of sacrifice. The man who chooses himself is not denying love. He is clearing the path to rediscover it in its purest form. When it arrives without demands, without theater, without a contract of emotional validation. And perhaps in the end, that is all he ever wanted. A place where he can breathe, where he can exist without having to constantly prove he deserves to be there. And if that place is not beside someone, then let it be within himself. Because only those who have learned to love their own company can love another without turning them into a prison. I didn't write this text from a distance. It doesn't come solely from books or theories. It comes from what never appears in photos. The silence after a cold conversation, the empty stare in the mirror at midnight, the feeling of fighting for something that only hurts. I've been that man. I believed that if I explained myself more, I would be understood. That if I did more, I would be valued. That if I loved enough, I would be loved back. But what I learned in my flesh is that love that demands constant effort to avoid losing it was lost long ago. This text is not a criticism of women. It's a portrait of a profound fatigue that many of us have learned to hide for fear of seeming fragile. It's about relearning to say yes to yourself after years of saying yes to others. And if you've made it this far with an open heart, I thank you, not only for listening to my words, but for hearing something within yourself as they unfolded. Perhaps you're considering stepping away from a relationship that only consumes you. Perhaps you're tired of trying to fix something that only exists when you're bleeding. Or perhaps, like me once, you just needed to hear this. You're not crazy, you're not wrong, and you're not alone. To all the men who have been too good for fear of seeming bad. To all those who stayed silent to maintain a false peace. To all those who are starting to walk alone again, with dignity, not in flight. This text is for you. Thank you for being here, for listening not only with your ears but with your soul. Oh, and if you've understood that feeling less is not coldness but power. Don't leave without seeing the full content. Click the link in the description or the first pinned comment to access it now. And now that you've made it this far, after this journey through the depths of the masculine soul, don't just leave. Come on. If this text spoke to you, irritated you, healed you, or simply left you thinking in silence, give it a thumbs up. It's free and feeds the algorithm, which, unlike some relationships, at least gives you something in return. Comment below. Have you ever chosen yourself? Or are you still negotiating your peace in monthly payments? Subscribe, because the next conversation might be even more uncomfortable and deeply necessary. A new text is coming soon, and all I can say is, it will touch a part of you that you pretend has healed. And now, suggestions are appearing on the screen, but beware. One of them might confront you with a side of yourself you've been avoiding for years. The other, well, it might be exactly what you need to hear today, even if it hurts. The choice is yours, but remember, freedom begins when you stop running from your own truth. Until then,